All right, and we are live with the 22nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson on Twitter at CKTricky.
And then I'm Seth Law, at Seth Law on Twitter. Tonight we're joined by Jimmy Mesta once again.
Yet again.
How's it going, Jimmy?
Yeah. It's going well. You guys must be desperate for talent here. Have me on twice.
It's been, we were talking about it earlier. It's been since March 13th that you were on. So
it's very true.
You were just telling us we need a theme song for the podcast.
Yeah, I think some cool Batman style intro music or something to really get things kicked off. But that's all you.
Maybe Seth could sing us an intro.
There we go. Absolute. No, never mind. That's no good.
By the way, Seth, you know what I did when this thing started up? Forgot to hit mute.
Oh, you forgot to mute. Of course you did, because we're only 22 episodes in and you haven't learned.
Computers are hard, man. That's the whole point of this podcast. Computers are really hard.
Computers are hard. So it's almost like you should automate that, right? Make sure it doesn't happen again.
So you said it was March and I was last on?
Yeah, so it was early March, and you got for those that weren't around for that episode, you got bombarded with questions. I mean, there were we had to just cut it off at a certain point, so there were a lot of questions.
I think I know some of the parties responsible for those questions that might be listening and asking similarly hard questions tonight. So we'll see.
Yeah, I feel like it was an attempt to. I think you had said some of that was an attempt to see if they could stump you.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, that's okay.
Anyways, yeah. So it was good. Well, since then I've been. That was earlier in the year, obviously, and I was just finishing up my Kubernetes DevSecOps 2-day course that I have now done almost 15 days of on site at different locations. So a lot has happened. I've talked to, I guess, it's been hundreds of developers, sysadmins, architects, everybody in class. So it's grown, it's changed, it's gotten much more mature, and I've learned the state of Kubernetes and Kubernetes security at some very, very large organizations. So it's been really cool.
Awesome. Are there any new technologies that you've because the last time we had you on, you discussed a plethora of various technologies that that basically do different things when it comes to container security and Kubernetes. Have any of those products evolved, or is there anything new, that since 3 months ago? I mean, anything interesting?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting to begin with is that we're starting to see more attacks in the wild on Kubernetes infrastructure, right? None of them are that sexy or that glamorous, and most of it's somewhat boring, but we've seen things. I have this really good slide I made, all the way from the latest being in June this month, Docker Hub embedding malware. We all heard about that. We could talk about that later. It's not really Kubernetes specific, but then also in June was a Weight Watchers breach, which blows my mind that Weight Watchers even uses Kubernetes, but they do. And they had an unsecured Kubernetes dashboard. So as we know, as we probably talked about last time, the Kubernetes dashboard can allow access to basically admin type functionality within a cluster. You can launch jobs and create pods and containers. You can view secrets. You can grab config map data. You can do all sorts of things in the dashboard if left unsecured and given the right permissions.
This is like the second time this year, right? That it's been a big company where they got and the interesting thing, and I'm going to post this article. The interesting thing is, because I think it was Tesla last time, and then they had an AWS access key that was inside of their Kubernetes. And so with Weight Watchers, they're saying that's the same exact thing.
Yeah. And if you went on Shodan and looked around for the right port, you could probably find many of these unsecured dashboards. And it happens for a variety of reasons, right? They could be running a really old version of Kubernetes where they don't even know the dashboard's open. The service account that the dashboard uses has, full access to the cluster, the ability to do everything. Or they could be running the latest, like 110, and then somebody got annoyed with the way they used to do things and gave that service account more access than it needed, stripped away authentication. There are definitely ways to screw this up.
What do you mean by, for clarification, what did you mean by they got annoyed with the way things used to work?
Oh, yeah. Well, the dashboard wasn't as locked down by default in prior versions before role-based access control became a default in Kubernetes. So the dashboard was relatively this wide open thing that out of the box, you could access everything you needed. And if you upgraded a cluster and role-based access control was now enabled, that service account didn't allow you to access pieces of the dashboard that you used to be able to. And as we know, people like going around those things and just giving the service account more access versus scoping permissions and doing authentication properly. So nobody knows what happened at Weight Watchers or Tesla per se, but it is a pretty sad state of affairs. It's like going back in time to unauthenticated dashboards, like PHP myadmin status.
Yeah, it's almost like a CTF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what something else happened too. Shopify in May, user could access kubelet credentials and replay, namely kubelet certificate and private key. So this was a HackerOne report on the Shopify Kubernetes cluster, and the kubelet is the API that sits on each node within a cluster. So you could replay a request to that API to, spin up containers, to view the running pods on a given node, things like that. The kubelet has, very elevated privileges as well. So that's kind of what's been going on. And then Aviva is another one in October of last year, is another unsecured dashboard. So it's all fun stuff and simple things to fix, luckily.
I'm actually trying to find the.
Yeah, we're trying to track these down. Did you find the links for it?
Yeah, it says how a Shopify Kubernetes cluster. So it's the interesting thing is actually the title of it is. Sorry, my lights are flickering. Weird. SSRF in exchange leads to root access in all instances. I want to say this is the one. I think.
I think that's it.
Let me paste it in. And Jimmy can tell us. Put this in this chat.
When was that submitted? Let's see.
Yeah.
May? Yeah. That's $25,000 bounty. That's significant. Wow.
Once again, SSRF.
Yep, exactly. So it's access to the Google Cloud metadata. Yeah. So you're starting at a traditional web app phone, right? With SSRF, and then that Google Cloud metadata API endpoint, same with AWS, returned lots of interesting data that you could then go, I guess, authenticate to one of the nodes via the kubelet within the cluster, and you own the entire infrastructure at that point.
Because with that, what you're saying with those, with the creds, you're able to just access that API and do things on the API. Is that?
Yeah, more or less. I didn't read this whole thing, but if you have the certificate that kubelet uses. So to back up, we have and the master sends requests to the node to do things like, hey, like spin up a container within a pod on your node. It does that through the kubelet API. It's just a REST API. There's a couple things that could go wrong with the kubelet API. One being not having any sort of authentication at all. So at least Shopify was using client certificates to authenticate the master to node communication. But some places don't do that, and that's really, really bad. But if you get that cert, you can replay attacks or replay requests to the kubelet API, essentially just saying, I am the master, even if you aren't, please schedule this pod onto your node, and this pod will contain my container, spin that up, and my container has a malicious, it can mount a volume, it can do all sorts of things. It can be a privileged container and have root access to the node. There's all sorts of things once you're allowed to do like basically a Docker pull and Docker run on a node. So that's kind of what the issue around the kubelet, if you will.
Seth posted in chat his favorite part of that report. That was pretty funny. It's the redacted.
It's the certificate. Yeah, it's the certificate dump, but the whole certificate is just redacted. It's just black lines. Like, I mean, it makes sense. I can't figure out if it's HackerOne that redacted it or but it's funny.
That's how you know it's real.
That is an interesting point that, where AppSec and cloud and DevOps and all this technology sort of coincides, is that like typically when you're running a web app, it is pulling secrets from environment variables. So if for any reason you can, and it's the same thing when so this was Google Cloud, but like with AWS, they also have a URL that if you request, it has environment variables for credentials and other data, the metadata URL. So it's all. I wonder if there's a case to be made that it's easier to exploit infrastructure through applications now than perhaps inside of your typical data center setup. I actually don't know the answer to that.
Oh, it could be. I mean, I think control takeover from a web app, right, is a lot easier because we do view these as like we don't care for the servers in the same way that we used to, right? I mean, it's the whole cats versus cows or whatever you wanted to call it, right? Isn't that what it is? I can't remember.
Cattle versus pets.
Yeah, cattle versus pets, right? A pet you take care of and you make sure that it's good, by itself. But now that we're spinning up hundreds of these and we're just gonna, take them up and spin them down, we don't put as much thought into the security controls that are built into that and what the applications actually expose us to.
Totally.
At least, I mean, that's my opinion, right? That's what I'm seeing, and that's why SSRF is becoming a much bigger deal than it probably was 10 years ago.
Well, and when you think about it, like if you exploited a box, like even if you got, I don't know, you had command injection and you got a reverse shell out to yourself, I mean, it would be difficult to a degree, and that's when it. You kind of like your red team skills come into place, network skills, because now you've got to kind of identify the other instances of things running if you want to like further exploit and pivot throughout the network. And you've got to do you have to do a bit of legwork. Whereas like if you just were to have a Kubernetes dashboard exposed and you get an AWS key, or you get SSRF on a box hosted on AWS, if you've got that key, and I'm saying AWS, could be Google Cloud, could be whatever, like depending on the access, you might have access to just the data center, right? It's exposed publicly. That's the way that works. So
your data center is a series of APIs. And if you don't architect that with segmentation from the beginning, it's really hard, right? Like, you start sharing keys around, you have different environments, different VPCs that all need access to one another. And you're seeing that in Kubernetes. It's the same problem amplified now, where people want to shove all their workloads into one cluster and rely on what are very thinly veiled security sort of policies and security technologies built into Kubernetes, and try to kind of patchwork this thing. And as soon as you have one web app phone or one major issue in a misconfiguration in a cluster, you're taking down a lot more with it than we saw with like, here's your EC2 instance running your one single API endpoint, something like that. So the ways to pivot now, they're different. But I do think in these tightly coupled cloud native environments, the criticality is high once you find a way in.
So I mean, what are people using? And well, it's two different questions. What are you seeing people use for key management? And the flip side of that is what would you recommend? What would be an optimal sort of like way to go with that?
So yeah, I'm pretty sure we talked about this last time too. Since then, so there's two schools of thought, right? If you're using Kubernetes, you can bring your own secret management, key management store. You can use KMS, you can use Vault, you can use self-built kind of internal homebrewed sort of mechanisms that use HSMs, whatever it is. And that's actually what I see most of, because larger organizations have a very set way of doing secrets management, right? They're not going to bring Kubernetes in and be like, cool, let's not use that now, and we'll just use the Kubernetes secrets, because that doesn't make any sense, right? Because they have this whole process figured out. So I would say use what you have. Use something maybe that's decoupled from Kubernetes, because at this point, we're still looking at secrets unencrypted in plain text and etcd on the Kubernetes master for the most part, unless you're stripping away etcd as a separate cluster in your Kubernetes environment. There are mechanisms to encrypt those secrets in Kubernetes, but they're like alpha, experimental. They're not very GA at this point. So I'm seeing Vault and I'm seeing KMS. I'm seeing the stuff we've been using for a while just bolted on top of Kubernetes. And that's probably what I'd recommend. And if you have to use secrets in Kubernetes, definitely turn on encryption.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question, but it's it's a religious debate, right? Yeah. So.
We did talk about it last time. I was just pretty much curious what you've seen people kind of using, which it sounds like same old solutions as before, just on top of Kubernetes.
Which is trickier, right? It's not that easy. Then you're dealing with immutable infrastructure, containers that come and go within a matter of seconds, and they have to be able to go talk to a key store or a secrets management solution. So it's more of a problem of dealing with containers and secrets versus Kubernetes. Because you can use the built-in Kubernetes secrets, but I've not seen anybody that in the enterprise world actually doing that yet. That doesn't mean they aren't. It's just everyone's a little on the fence about it. Rightfully so.
Well, I mean, along those lines, right? Because we've got Amazon, you've got some of the services that are now offering Kubernetes like as a service.
Yep.
Are they tying into like, Amazon's key management solution, their KMS, or how is that working in those situations? What have you seen?
So managed Kubernetes, depending on your cloud provider, will play much nicer, obviously, with the built-in, secrets manager in AWS, and Google Cloud has its own secrets management utility. So that's what I'd recommend. But then you have vendor lock-in and all those things that you're supposed to try to avoid if possible. And managed Kubernetes in AWS specifically is so new that nobody I've talked to has even really given it an actual go in any sort of production sense. And realistically, it doesn't excite me for a variety of reasons, because I can't even play around with it without it costing me an arm and a leg per month at this point. So I use Google, I use GKE for all my sandbox development. I have a bunch of clusters in GKE, and that I find that to have a nice integration with all the stuff that Google offers. There is probably where I would recommend people go if they're starting from scratch, because it's
okay.
it's just easy. The shared master model, the upgrades, the node pooling, the auto scale, all this stuff you get out of the box that you just don't even have to think about. You're just kind of writing YAML manifest files, configuring a command line, and going is a big game changer. So
yeah, that's cool. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get away with from the issues that you're seeing, like with Shopify, right, and SSRF. You know, the code that we're running on top of Kubernetes or Docker or EC2, right? It's always going to introduce vulnerabilities. And the second that we know that there is an endpoint there that allows us access to the KMS or to shared secrets, right? It's a lot easier to do that when you know, oh, guess what? They are running in GKE. So I know that these are the different URLs that I want to try when I find SSRF, right?
Sure, yeah, and at least when you're using something like Vault or AWS Secrets Manager or what have you, you have this auditability. You know, you have CloudTrail logs. You have a way to rotate keys efficiently. You have a lot of built-ins that you might not. You know, you have a master key that's never used and short-lived keys and all this stuff that I think is really valuable when it comes to secrets storage and secrets management, that you can't do that in Kubernetes by default. It's like you just give it a base64 encoded value and it stores it in etcd and then you retrieve it later. There's no notion of like, you know, rotation or any of the auditability. There is some auditability, but it's relatively new and it's not nearly as robust as CloudTrail. So yeah, I would, especially in mixed cloud environments, just use the key management that you got in place. Don't try to reinvent the wheel.
Cool. Okay, so reinvent the wheel. Got it. We'll start there.
Yep.
Just ignore all of that solid advice and just, you know, do whatever you want.
That's right.
That's what people do anyways.
Yeah. Come on, they're a special use case, right? Everyone is a special case and a special butterfly.
Yeah, but in our environment, you don't understand.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, every class I've been to, somebody's been like, well, we have this, you know, high performance MySQL Java API team that runs these massive clusters of MySQL databases, and they're performance tuned over the past 10 years. And I'm trying to convince my team to put them in Kubernetes. I'm just like, don't do that. Like, it's like literally like, it's like, you don't need to shove every part of your infrastructure into Kubernetes. It's great for like stateless services, you know, things like, you know, REST endpoints, something that has like a JWT style authentication mechanism, or like things that come and go, or really bursty loads, right? Things that are job-like or cron job-like. Kubernetes is great. Data science jobs work well, web front ends, things like that. But when you start talking about, you know, you need this amount of like GPU and you're writing this crazy graphics processing box that's just like $1 million a month, it's like, you're just re-architecting for no reason. Like, just have Kubernetes do the rest of the stuff. So
I like that a Kubernetes security trainer and consultant is saying, yeah, you may not need to use it.
Well, it's true.
It just depends.
I mean, the Google Cloud team will tell you the same thing. It's like, if you're running like a 3-tier Rails application for your, you know, unicorn aspiring startup, like, you probably are better off on like a PaaS solution, like a Heroku at that point. You don't need the added complexity and overhead of Kubernetes. But there are benefits for more advanced, more mature teams that are actually running real workloads that need that kind of, you know, elasticity, if you will. So
yeah, because it does take dedicated teams to actually run Kubernetes. It's not like you can just have a 3 or 4 person team and I mean, obviously I would hope people are not trying to go that route with a 3 or 4 person team, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it actually takes a sizable amount of, I would imagine anyways, it takes a sizable team to, okay, from what I've seen, it does. You know, I don't know if that's always the case, but from what I've seen, it can be pretty intense to
yeah, no, it's a skill set, like you would hire for that skill set and not expect, next week that your developers and ops teams are writing YAML manifest files and Dockerizing your entire infrastructure. And it's a multi-year process in a large corporation, I would say.
So what would you say the benefits are of, some of the good reasons to move to Kubernetes?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. After all that negativity I just threw down.
Yeah, we're trying to balance out the cynicism and
I'm not trying to be cynical for the sake of it, right? It's because people jump on hot technologies. That's the nature of our business. But Kubernetes, if you're going down all the way to the developer laptop where you've committed to using containers as a technology for deployment, right? You get lots of benefits on the laptop level, on local dev level, where you have this environment that's going to be as close to production as possible. It's probably not the same, but it's much closer than before when we're just writing code locally on our laptops and hoping it works on said server that might have the packages installed or not. So you get this self-contained image, and the CI/CD pipeline becomes pretty fast and immutable, right? So immutability wasn't as much of a thing before, at least in the way containers give us this ability to say, just roll out, version 1.x now on half of our node pool, and we're going to do a canary deployment using containers and be able to roll back instantly. Like that kind of stuff was a little harder in the chef traditional, just update the server and see what happens sort of world. So you can have benefits all the way down to the laptop. So if you're already using containers and you've committed to that for your workloads, and you started kind of decoupling the monolith, if you will, and breaking things up into smaller services, Kubernetes works great because now you have 16 microservices that all scale independently of one another to infinity. Your front ends, if you hit Hacker News one day, can auto scale very, very, very quickly if you get that burst of load, and then scale back down for you. So those are the types of things where it's like auto scaling in AWS didn't really give us the speed that we wanted, and it definitely didn't give us the same type of auto scaling that we're seeing in Kubernetes. And Kubernetes has come out with so many features that people are re-architecting the way they write code to do things like jobs and cron jobs on a pool of servers that are almost these functions that you just run, and they finish their job and give an output, and that's the end. So that's kind of the thing in Kubernetes that's probably the most special, right? It's a way to take containers into production. But if you don't have containers yet, you got to start there. You got to plan ahead to this sort of thing, because you can't just be, I think doing containers and Kubernetes all at once is just tough for people to wrap their heads around.
So, I mean, you've talked about some performance gains, but are there any security gains that you get because I would imagine, one I could think of, you talked about doing this at the laptop level. I could definitely envision it's easier for either a consultancy or for somebody in-house to just get the app running locally on their box, presumably, and then, testing what they're seeing in the code on their laptop, doing sort of the hybrid analysis, which we've talked about before, being a mix of code and having that app running locally. Besides, so that's the one thing off the top of my head I could think of, but are there any other sort of security gains you get from moving to Kubernetes?
No, that's a good question. So in theory, containers can offer you some level of isolation that maybe we didn't have before. They're not a VM. We don't have the hypervisor. We don't have our own kernel. But a container should be fairly simple, right? And you're supposed to run one process in a container. So right there, we don't have we don't have telnet. We don't have any of those things that old school hackers sitting on a box love to just take advantage of, because it's, if you look at Alpine Linux or any of these really, really lightweight Linux container images, they don't do a whole lot. So in theory, that's number one, a benefit, right? And then number two, there's some pretty great tools out there to scan container images for vulnerabilities. So you can run this in your CI/CD pipeline. Tools like Claire, Encore, they're going to look for common vulnerabilities, like libSSL is out of date, and there's a remote code execution flaw in this package. And then as an operator, as the ops team, DevOps team, you can start building golden images that your whole company is only allowed to use, and the security team, has worked with the ops team to vet these images. It's, the packages are up to date. Everything is kosher when you actually bundle this container up and send it out to Kubernetes. So that's a win, I think. And then Kubernetes itself, as I was being cynical before, but if you do it right and you architect it correctly, it's not worse than what we have. And in many ways, if you implement some things like mutual TLS authentication, network policies, some of the admission controls that are out there that allow us to define what a container can run as, like not running as root, all these things. If you take advantage of those features, it's more powerful than things we've had before. So I think it's just a matter of doing it versus, just flying by the seat of your pants and trying to get things shipped as fast as possible. So yeah, there's every step all the way to the developer laptop. I think there's benefits if you take advantage of them.
Interesting. Yeah. Sorry, it sounds like Seth, you're going to say something.
Oh no, I mean, I was just going to ask along those same lines, right? It sounds like most of the benefits are definitely for a more disciplined organization, right? Somebody that's put some of that, time and forethought into, developing around it. I mean, what is kind of the industry adoption there that you're seeing? Is it more of these, large organizations that are investigating it, or are you seeing more startups, or, is it just across the board?
Across the board. And I'd say the smaller the organization, that's probably my opinion, obviously, but you should probably, if you're containerizing your application and your services, managed Kubernetes takes a lot of the thought out of securing, at least at the node level and the master level and the kubelet level. Like all that stuff kind of becomes more of like a platform as a service, and you're just updating it through some GUI or command line utility. And you can rely on Google, who obviously wrote the book and the source code for Kubernetes for the most part, to give you the latest and greatest, to give you security advisories, all these things. And then at larger organizations, I am working with a company that has a 2-person team just dedicated to like DevOps security and Kubernetes security. And these guys are highly trained assassins, and they wrote the threat model on Kubernetes. They write the policies, they write the automation that spins up their clusters, and those clusters are rock solid. So if you're big, invest in that sort of thing, and then guide your company towards like not being able to deploy containers insecurely, because there's no way. You know what I mean? Like that's the DevSecOps pipeline, where I bring in a vulnerable image, I write some YAML manifest that's out of whack and asking for too many privileges. I just don't allow that in the cluster by default. So it's just, then you don't even have to think about it. And then you have the guys that are skilled and trained in that world, keeping up to date with it. So that's what I see at larger organizations, because managed Kubernetes doesn't work for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, that makes sense. Right. And like, I know a lot of the guys that are on, like, that are following us and things like that probably don't have the same level of experience, obviously, as you do with Kubernetes, right? And I know I don't. Ken and I, it's definitely new to us as well. And we did talk through some of the, hey, these are the introductions, and this is where you want to go with it. Right? Are you seeing anything new that we should be aware of in that space that is either coming down the pipeline or other attacks? You said that you've started to see more of them, like the malware stuff that was out on Docker Hub. But is there other stuff that is moving along or progressing in that space?
Yeah. So and on the Docker Hub note, that's hardly exciting, right? It's like, okay, that's pretty much the same as you blindly pulling in some npm package or Ruby gem or whatever it is. It's the same concept, except now it's a whole operating system, which is way better for cryptocurrency miners and all this crap that people want to distribute. And I blame the people who pulled images and didn't look at them. Like Docker Hub should be doing their part, right? But that's going to be a problem going forward. And then the other parts are really just keeping up with the actual platform itself, because things like network policies. So you have 65 different pods all running in a Kubernetes cluster. By default, they can kind of just all talk to each other, right? They're not authenticated. They're in this shared space for the most part. And if you don't set up a network policy or a service mesh, if you pop one box through a web app phone, or SSRF would be great there, or you have a developer that should only have access to a certain namespace and they can get access to production, things like that, where you can find yourself on a pod talking to maybe a Redis key value store. Redis isn't going to ask you for authentication unless you're mutually auth. So stuff like that, I think people are just, it's not a vulnerability in that, like, we're seeing it in the news, but it probably will be. Like, that's the privilege traversal escalation attack vector, if you will, in Kubernetes. It's just forgetting to put things there because it's hard. Because it's like firewall rules. It's way easier to not have them than it is. Yeah. So that same stuff we've worried about forever and preached about, it's just happening now.
So you're saying, implement a firewall, scan your code, don't trust user input, don't run code you don't trust, right? It really does sound like
same stuff, different day. Yeah.
Different day, right? And which is where we start with all of it, right? You think back to like the mobile days, or like when iOS and Android first started taking off as well. It was the same thing, right? It's just a different platform that we're dealing with it on.
Yeah. Wild West. And it's getting better. But you have to use the tools available to you. And so in Kubernetes now, if you spun up a cluster, RBAC, or role-based access control, is a default. So you can't just have these admin service accounts that are auto-mounted into every pod, and like these really like wacky things that happened in the past. It's way harder to do that now. So at least the secure by default is getting better in Kubernetes for sure. And upgrading is, if you're in managed Kubernetes, is really easy. If you're not, it could be a pain in the butt, right? It's the same stuff we saw before.
Yeah. At that point, you're upgrading your operating system, right? Realistically, that's what it is. If you were dealing with a server itself, there's no guarantee that your app's going to run on top of that. You're going to have to test it out, right?
Yep.
So I know you had taken a certification.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm blocking that out. Yeah. So this morning I actually took the Cloud Native Computing Foundation has a couple Kubernetes certifications, if you will. The one I took today was a certified Kubernetes application developer. It's like $300. I got an early access beta thing, but it is a lab-based exam. So it's truly, you just get a shell on I assume they're using GKE or Google Cloud or Google Compute or something. And there's 6 different clusters running, and you have deploying secrets to config maps to auto scaling to resource quotas, all this stuff. It's not really security specific, but I didn't study at all, which may or may not have been a good idea because I didn't actually finish all 19 because I had to like set up for 10 minutes with a proctor. So only an hour and 50 minutes, and which is kind of a bummer that I nailed the ones I did, but then I just ran out of time. Maybe I'm just slow, but it's a lot. It's like a lot of challenges to do, and you're in somebody else's. You're not in your own shell, in your own terminal where you feel warm and cozy. You're out on this like web shell thing, and so. But the tasks themselves were really, really good. So if you're looking to get in, full on learn Kubernetes, they offer basic training for free, and then advanced training for a cost, and then you can just take the exam. But again, it's definitely not security focused. So it is, yeah.
But I mean, that's with anything, right? Like if you want to do application security, learn to develop. If you want to do network security, learn to administer, right? And I think we've talked about this a bit before where, you need to learn the nuts and bolts and the fundamentals. And this is, I think I would argue, one of the situations where this is learning and certifying on the nuts and bolts of Kubernetes. And
Totally.
then once you do that, then the security component once you've got that all locked down.
Yeah, exactly. It's great for anybody. If your organization is, and honestly, not to plug my course, but my course doesn't imply prior Kubernetes knowledge, right? So I spent a good amount of time starting with like, what's a cluster? What's a pod? What's a service? What's a deployment? What's a secret? And the labs are progressive in that, like, you build a container from a Golang binary, like an API that does next to nothing. Take the container and put it into a pod. Take the container, put it into a deployment. Hook up a MySQL pod to it. Like, it's very much geared towards each step of building an environment in Kubernetes, but then every lab has a security twist, right? It's like, oh, do you see what's wrong with how we just did that? Because if you get popped, you could access this, that, and the other thing. So it's a good mix, but it definitely isn't, it doesn't dive into like assuming everybody is an expert in Kubernetes.
Well, I like the idea of the scenario-based training. Like scenario-based training, anything that makes you think critically versus regurgitating. Yeah, not to get off on a tangent, but in terms of training styles, it's really hard to actually, for me anyways, and I think I'd argue probably for most people, to really thoroughly understand something. I don't know. Some people do learn well by just sitting there and listening to somebody talk to them for 8 hours. I'm not one of those people. Like after 5 minutes, I'll zone out. Anyways, I think that there's a lot of value in a training style that engages you, requires you to think, in the sense that not engaging like that person's interesting when they talk. Like, no, it makes you think. It's critical thinking. It's scenario based. That kind of training. If I'm going to take training, that's the kind of training that I want.
Yeah, especially in Kubernetes when everything is an abstraction, right? Like the slides are just don't do enough until you run the command and you're like, one of the labs is you exec into a container and it's a 2-container pod, and then you talk to the other container in the pod over localhost. And then everyone's like, oh, I get what a pod is now. But before you're like, here's some boxes in this cloud and they just do this thing. Yeah. And so it doesn't really click. And then the last lab is actually, or second to last lab is actually pretty fun, where we run Jenkins in a cluster with a Docker image registry in the cluster, and we do a CI/CD pipeline all locally in Kubernetes, and the build breaks it's like you spin all this stuff up, you're in Jenkins, you're doing your thing, and then the build intentionally breaks, and then the goal is to fix it. And that has been like, everybody's just like on the whiteboard, there's like talking to each other, just like, I don't know how to figure this out. And it's like awesome because that's the way you learn. And that's how it breaks because of RBAC, because you don't have a role-based access control policy in place and you have to go build one. And it's not hard. It's just like, where do you do it? How do you apply it? How do you make sure it's applied appropriately? And how did you give it the minimum privileges necessary to do the job? So all those things come together and it's very simple, but the fix is people go down crazy rabbit holes. Like they're doing stuff that I wouldn't even ever think of. And you're just like, it's not that complicated. So it's but it's a good learning exercise for sure.
Oh yeah. Like, otherwise you got someone here, these squares have this nickname, these triangles have this other nickname. Do you understand it now? No, you don't understand it. Like you don't get it,
Yeah.
and then you put them in a situation like you said, because going down those rabbit holes, I feel like if you're going down those rabbit holes, like it's going to expose, even if it's not the solution that, you're necessarily looking for, there is value in going down rabbit holes. There totally is, right?
I mean, that's security, right? Like I'm sure everybody on this call and listening in is like been down a few rabbit holes and spent the whole night doing something completely off topic than what you were intended to do. So, but I think that's how you learn. So it's fun. It's a fun environment for sure. Just because you could probably get away with a lot of the labs, just copying, pasting, and you're like running stuff. You're like, cool, I'm like doing Kubernetes. And then as soon as something breaks, everyone's just like, brain is fried and they just don't know, they're just going down different paths. So it's fun.
We did have a question that, this is the second time the question had come up. Actually, I kind of missed it the first time. But I know we talked about it the last, I think we might've talked about it before, but, so the question is, are there any tools that are good at hardening Kubernetes and monitoring config changes?
Yeah, there are a few. Open source, we have, and actually as part of a lab, we do it in Jenkins, but you could scan your manifest files and or your actual cluster for CIS benchmark top whatever. So there's a CIS benchmark hardening guideline for Kubernetes, and it's called Kube Bench, KUBE-bench.
I'll find the link. So
yeah, it's through Aqua Security, and Aqua Security does also have some commercial stuff that they offer when it comes to Kubernetes. So that's a good one to give you like, am I doing the right things? Like, am I allowing privilege pods to be scheduled into my cluster? That's a fail. Am I only allowing the kubelet to communicate over HTTPS? This is Kubernetes cluster security hygiene tool, and we have tools like this for CIS benchmarks for AWS, right? It's the same as like Prowler and a few of the others that are out there that you run against your AWS account. So that's a good one. Twistlock is also, they put out some pretty decent commercial offerings I'm seeing. They integrate with Istio service mesh to do this like all-in-one, what it's like this dashboard that says, which system calls is my container running? Are there any known vulnerabilities running on that operating system in the container? Are my network policies, mutual TLS, authentication, is that all in place? So Twistlock has a few decent tools. And then who else is doing Kubernetes security stuff? Istio itself is it's not a scanning tool per se, but that's a Kubernetes hardening tool where you would apply a service mesh, and it has a CA and does all your mutual TLS authentication. It's a sidecar container that basically runs next to another container within a pod, and all of the traffic from maybe your Rails application runs through Istio, and you could do lots of interesting monitoring Sysdig also has a Kubernetes offering. You can use Sysdig Falco, it's called, and I believe that plays nice with Kubernetes. So this is runtime stuff. This is like, what's my Docker container doing under the hood? Is it making dangerous calls? Are people execing into it and running privileged commands? Is it mounting some volume it shouldn't? So Sysdig has been around for a bit, but Falco is like a container native tool that they have out.
And I've linked to all of these, by the way. So
cool.
They're all in the YouTube video and the Slack.
Cool. And there are CVEs and stuff for Kubernetes now. So you can Google puts out security bulletins for Kubernetes. I know that's not a tool, but it's good to be informed of issues that come up when you need to upgrade your version of Kubernetes, things like that. And then really it comes down to manual verification of things. So yeah, you can run tools, you could set up your manifest files to do a certain thing that you think is going to be the right secure way, but you should always go double check manually. And then you can check Shodan and see if your cluster's out. I mean, that's like last ditch effort, right? Like make sure you're not already owned and mining somebody else's Ethereum or whatever. So I don't recommend getting to that point.
Hopefully not.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, the first time I had seen it and I totally forgot to ask it, and then I got a DM directly about it. So
and on the side note, I think there's a lot of opportunity too, right, in this space to take some of the older concepts and older tools that we have and start writing new tools for Kubernetes that help secure the ecosystem even further. So that's just a side note, but there's definitely opportunity there.
Interesting.
Well, yeah, it probably just depends on where there's gaps, or where it's not as built out, right? I mean, like with any infrastructure like this, I mean, I don't know. We saw this at AWS or at reInvent all the time, right? Somebody comes out with a tool, and then the next year Amazon builds it into the platform and just does away with their whole business line, right? That's always the danger that you have. But at the same time, like you mentioned Twistlock and some of those others that it does feel a lot like the monitoring tools that we've seen in the past, or some of what they do, but the spin is slightly different, right? And the access that's required is slightly different. So, there's always a case for that. Sorry, Ken, what were you going to say?
Oh, no. Sorry, go ahead. I'm just responding to Punk. Punk.sh is the new Shodan. Sorry, that was a comment from the
Oh, there's
from the peanut gallery.
Is that the new? That's the new Shodan. I'm behind the times on my reconnaissance tools, I guess.
I haven't even heard about this. Huh.
It's called punk.sh.
Yeah, punk.sh. I'm just looking at it right now.
That's a great domain name.
Yeah. It's by Hyperion Gray. What is Punk? It's a search engine for internet scale vulnerability scans. We're currently scanning. We're collecting banners from in comparison to Shodan that only grabs. Oh, so it is like an alternative to Shodan. Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it's like, how do I do? I just want to do ports.
Now we're figuring out this Punk. This is what happens. You talk about going down rabbit holes. This is what happens.
Exactly. All of us are browsing punk.sh right in this moment.
All it takes to
derail the whole conversation.
I can't tell if ADD is a strength or a weakness in this industry.
Yeah, right. So I was just looking for kubelet ports.
Interesting.
I don't see any on this port list, but that's that's a very obvious thing, right? It's 102.55 and 102.50, and one is read and one's read write, and they're both dangerous. But if you find 102.55, which is, I believe that's the read write port, I mean, it could be game over, right? If they have no authentication. So highly scriptable.
Interesting. Yeah, actually, I put in that and put in 102.55 in Cube security, and yeah, it's backdooring through Kubelet.
But yeah, it's bad times. And I tell every class, it's like, if you're gonna pick a piece of malware that's mining cryptocurrency, a Kubernetes cluster is epic. It's way better than just a dinky like T2 medium on AWS. Like, especially if they have it set up right, you get infinite scalability for your cryptocurrency miner, and nobody's
and
probably
they pay for it.
Yeah, nobody's probably watching it, so it's like, yeah.
So do you get called in? Speaking of that, do you get called in proactively, or but I don't know if you can say it, but I'm just curious if there are times you've been called in because people are like, our boxes were used to mine crypto. Like, we clearly need some training and some guidance. I don't know if because that's definitely happened on the AppSec side for Seth and I.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I imagine, right? I haven't yet, right? So it's usually like people are Kubernetes curious, or their organization has decided 2019 is the year of Kubernetes for us, and this is prep work. But that doesn't mean I won't. Hopefully I do, because that'd be awesome. Like, that'd be to sleuth through like a totally like rooted, infested cluster. That'd be totally cool. But I haven't been called in for that yet. I know Twistlock does some of that stuff. They did the Tesla write-up. They were the ones that I guess went in and figured out what actually went down, which wasn't rocket science by any means.
Yeah, no, that's not at all rocket science. Yeah, that's pretty easy to figure out.
But yeah, if anybody listening has an IR engagement in Kubernetes, I'm totally down.
Oh, that'd be neat. That'd be a fun one. Rocket science joke. Now the chat's just.
Now it's gone.
Yeah. Now it's just gone off the rails. But yeah. Something I was going to say. I can't remember what I was going to say.
Well, I guess I didn't get hammered with questions this time, so.
No, they were a little bit. It was a little bit better than last time. The whole episode,
Well, all my secret admirers haven't joined, I guess.
Yeah, they're starting to get on now for some reason, right? Maybe we did it earlier, or we did it later last time, something like that.
I don't know, but somebody did mention that like our Twitter links go out. In one case, it was like 24 hours after the podcast. Because of that random ass algorithm Twitter's pushing, I guess it came up a day after the podcast started. So I'm like,
yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, and if you're listening, and subscribe if you want to view it live. Otherwise, we're on. Now aren't we on iTunes or something, Seth? What did you do with that?
We are. Yeah, we didn't announce that. The podcast, like, now when I push it, the podcast, the audio version is available on Google Play and on Apple Podcasts. So you can stream it after the fact and then just jump on the Slack channel if you have other questions or you want to interact with the guests or whoever it is, right? So we're growing up a little bit. Yeah, we are on Stitcher as well. We are growing up a little bit, 20 some odd episodes in.
Never.
Eventually, Ken will figure out that he has to mute one window before, starting the podcast.
Fucking
maybe.
Man. Never remember to do it. Never remember to do
it. Yeah. Or I'll come up with a checklist and make sure he does it before we go live. Maybe we can do that,
Yeah, and the checklist would be one item. Don't put it on mute. Don't let it play. That would be the one checklist item. So you have one job. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Ken is saying that YouTube doesn't like us announcing other platforms on podcasts, but I guess they, we're not big enough that they're listening to us yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's because Twitter's stupid. No, I mean, well, yeah, I won't go off on Twitter, but that algorithm is the worst. It really is the worst. But
oh yeah, congrats on now being a Microsoft employee, Ken. I haven't talked to you since.
technically,
hopefully you cashed out big. I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, financially, it's nobody's crying, but so the deal doesn't actually close. It hasn't closed yet. So whenever it closes, then I'll technically work for Microsoft, but I don't know when that'll be. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I'm happy about it. To be honest with you, I'm actually happy about it. So yeah, as long as I don't have to work on like a Surface or something, then we're all good. So
yeah, I mean,
he needs 2 Surfaces.
I need at least 2 Surfaces.
Overall, I think it's a good thing, right? As long as they don't have Clippy integration in the GitHub, then I'm happy.
I've seen a Clippy Octocat icon, which was pretty awesome.
The jokes are endless for sure.
Yeah,
but overall, congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't really do anything, right? Like I just joined the company. Yeah, I did my job, showed up. But congratulations. Yeah, I feel like it's definitely congratulations for like Neil, who I work with. He's been part of the team for years now, and for folks that have been around for a while, it's nice for that to like all that work they put in, and it's been quite a they've done quite a bit to build out the security. And engineers as well, but I'm just talking about Neil, so he works on security, and yeah, he did a bunch of work. Patrick Toomey, Greg Ose, those folks have been around for a while, so I'm really happy for them. It's paid off. So
cool, and yeah, I got nothing else to plug other than OWASP San Francisco. I'll be there giving a Kubernetes talk at their Thursday night meetup in August. August Jimmy, 23rd. Yeah, that's it.
I mean, I know you're giving the trainings all over the place. It's mostly to private organizations. Are you doing any, public trainings as far as Kubernetes goes?
At conferences, Loco Moco Sec 2019 is all I have in the books right now.
Okay.
Mainly because I haven't submitted to anything. So it's so much travel and calendar orchestration that it's overwhelming already to even think about going to a conference. So, and Loco Moco Sec is different, obviously.
It's different, yeah. Something like that. Yeah, well, we should talk. I mean, I help organize that Hack West that's in the spring sometime too.
Is that in?
Dates for. That's in Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City? Yeah, see, I'm happy to.
That's not far from you, but it would be interesting. I know there were people that were asking after the last episode if we would be interested in having you come up and do it. So I'll start those conversations.
No, totally. And if I get asked to do something, that's much different than me going through the CFP process, right? It's like,
yep.
I just haven't. I don't keep up with it, and then usually Ken was just like, oh yeah, I'm going to Cactus Con, which is the only local conference to me, and I'm probably going to miss the deadline. So,
thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, because I wanted to plug that people should go to it, just because I like the conference, and yeah, I'll see if I get accepted. But yeah, Cactus Con it's only like a couple hour drive from you. We were talking about.
Yeah, that's huge. So I'm gonna submit as well, most likely, and see what happens.
Well, yeah, I mean, Cactus Con is a good one, right? I mean, Andrew runs it, and I've been to it the last like 3 or 4 years, right? Ken, it's been a while since you were down at it, right?
She's 2013, 2014. I don't know. Whenever, I think it was like its first or second year that. Wait, I wasn't with you. I don't think. I think it was.
No.
I think I was with maybe John Poulin, because John goes every. Yeah, John Poulin was there. Justin Collins gave a talk. Yeah, No, it's been a while. It's a great conference, though. I highly recommend it. It's really fun. And also, like in September, so it's late September, it's almost October. Like the weather in Phoenix at that time is going to be pretty nice. So it's always at a good location, good weather, good conference, good talks. So yeah. Let's see what else is going on. I did what? Hey, Jimmy. So Jim Manico, your partner in crime.
Yep.
He is actually coming on the podcast as well. Yeah,
in August, right?
August 14th. Yeah, we're actually we've got Matt Tesaro, Jim Manico, Scott Piper, Justin Larson, Ken Toller. We got a bunch of people coming on, all scheduled. So we've got people coming on. Their schedules out till September at this point. So, but yeah, I wanted to mention Jim's coming on the podcast. So,
well, I definitely appreciate getting invited on for round 2. So anytime, I'm still very deep into this world. So stuff comes up all the time, and I'll be around the circuit as much as I can be.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate you spending your time with us. Before we get off, I did want to mention a couple things. So Chris Gates was on the podcast a while back, and I just wanted to put out to the viewers that his keynote talking about, it's called Hacking Your Happiness. Highly recommend watching this video. And then Kevin Cody, and I have the YouTube link here. Kevin Cody was also on the show a couple times, much like you, Jimmy. He's been on here twice now. And much like both of you, we'll ask you to come on again. Here's his, that wasn't a link to, the link I just posted was to Kevin Cody. The one for Chris I lost it. Here it is. Okay. Anyways, highly recommend this talk. So anyways, just wanted to put that out there. But next week we've got Ken Toller. Seth, anything that we need to mention before we hop off?
No, I don't think so. It'll be interesting to talk to Ken Toller. It's, stuff that he's been working on. We've been trying to get him on here for a while. He's one of those in the peanut gallery that's always, asking questions. So it'll be good to pepper him as well. But Jimmy, like always, it's super interesting to talk through the Kubernetes and container world. I don't think we get enough of that on our side. So appreciate it once again. But totally. That's everything for me. So
I will mention one last time. Sorry, Jimmy. I will mention. We will get the link. I don't have the link in front of me, but plugging our course that we're giving in
October.
October at AppSec USA. Seth and I are giving a course on how to effectively do code review and also how to do it with modern technology stacks. So again, sweet. Hopefully next week. Yeah. Well, it's kind of sweet because I was looking at the schedule and it turns out Jim Manico is also giving training, and he's a really good, well-known trainer. So I'm pretty sure Jim's gonna get like a ton of attendees, and good for. I mean, it's gonna be funny. I'm gonna give him. We'll rib him about it on the August 14th podcast. So
yeah, I mean, different audience, right? So
for sure,
it's all good. On that note, one small plug. There's a new manacode.com website coming very soon, and there's going to be a brochure that has all of the course offerings that I train, as well as Jim and Philippe. So there's 3 trainers all under the Manacode name, covering mobile security, AppSec, DevSecOps, like user awareness training, like the whole gamut. So check it out, and it's coming soon. So.
All right, I posted the link to manacode.com in both channels for those who would like to check it out. So
cool. Thank you.
Well, man. Well, once again, thanks for joining us. Don't hop off because we're gonna stop the show, but we'll hang on for a few minutes.
Yeah. Give me one. My battery is about to die, so let me grab my charger real quick.
Okay, cool. Well, with that, Seth, anything else before we stop the broadcast?
No. Thanks for joining. Like always, this will be up shortly on all of the different channels. So we'll see. We'll talk to everybody next week.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining. Later.